Smooth Breakfast with Valentine Ohu.
And Ayo Mairo Ese. Good morning, Lagos.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Now, there are different ways to have a conversation, especially discussing the stories on the newspaper headlines. Our newspapers this morning. We'll go through all 8 stories together, but we'll enjoy your contributions through WhatsApp 0809 444 0981. That's the number to send in your WhatsApp messages 0809 444 0981. And on Twitter,
Is that Smooth 981 FM? Use the hashtag freshly pressed 981. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. So please go onto YouTube, search for Smooth 98.1 FM. And on Instagram, we're streaming live. You can follow Valentine Ohu, and he'll be able to you can watch live from Instagram.
all right, we're actually streaming from Smooth 981 on Instagram.
Oh, at Smooth. Okay,
Yes,
fantastic.
yes.
So go to Smooth 981 on Instagram, and you'll be able to watch us live from there.
All right, let's start with our first story this time from the Punch newspaper. Devoe Okorie, by the way, is one of our analysts at Devoe Okorie on Twitter. Good morning.
Good morning, Lagos. $30 billion. Where's the money?
And Gbolahan, Mr. G Quest. Good morning.
Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Valentine. And good morning, Lagos.
Thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Oh,
Our Punch newspaper has the first story, Devoe. Senate probes CBN over 20 trillion naira on remitted stamp duty. You know, this came into effect in 2016, January. Yeah, they issued a circular to all the banks and financial institutions to comply to the stamp duty charge on current accounts against the federal government's revenue projections for 2.5 trillion naira annually. Now, the House, the Senate, is asking them to come and defend all the monies accrued from then, 2016 till now. Your thoughts on this story, please?
Well, it's not really much a story. It's just a reality check from the Senate. Prior to the policy release whereby stamp duty was meant to be charged on transactions and deposits for banks, which they complied with. The Senate is simply saying that the CBN and NIPS, that's the background financial transfer company, they have failed to aid the federal government in realizing this amount. So, in their view, they were hoping that about 5 trillion will be collected annually, which would give them, if they collect from 2013 to 2016, which is way back, they would have about 15 to 20 trillion. Well, Senate President just said that they've reviewed the situation, realized, first of all, that there was no money to be collected, and that money hasn't been collected. So I think the House of Assembly, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, should spend more of their time in coming up with brilliant ways to improve our revenue, not just projections, but revenue generations, and not so much as in taxing, because stamp duty is one of them. You've heard of the GSM tax, which still hasn't been finalized. We've also seen the VAT, which I haven't studied yet. That's a 7.5%, and some feelers are that there will be a petroleum tax. So these are the things I need them to concentrate on. Pass the PIB bill to ensure revenues coming from oil and gas investors, and
It's already contained in the new finance bill.
they haven't passed it. Until it passes, we're not going to see that money. It's going to remain a pie in the sky. And for those who don't know what a pie in the sky is, that is counting your chickens before they hatch.
Thank you, Devo. Gbolahan, the next story will interest you. From New Telegraph, Nigeria needs $22.7 billion loan to fix infrastructures, the federal government is saying, through several ministers. Now, Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Haji Azain Ahmed, Works and Housing counterpart, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, Senator Bemisola Saraki, that state, Minister of State for Transport, Debt Management Office as well was represented. They were there in front of the Senate to defend the loan requests by the President, Buhari, trying to justify this case and saying Nigeria needs that much. It's in the same, we haven't necessarily relaxed from the conversation that we had yesterday, calling for states to ramp up the internally generated revenue, how it can be self-sufficient.
Mhm.
Now, from this story, at first read, you'd assume that the federal government is just, depending on the fact that, okay, we're going to keep borrowing for the next couple of years.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
what are your thoughts regarding this?
Well, this conversation is the same conversation we've been having for several years now, that Nigeria's debt profile keeps on rising. And currently, as we speak, as at June, the debt profile for Nigeria stands at about over $80 billion. Of course, we know where we started from in 2015, what our debt profile was. But right now, at the moment, we are currently at a higher debt profile than when President Obasanjo got the debt relief for us. So we are borrowing at an alarming rate. That's nothing new now. But the federal government has now approached the National Assembly once more to say that look into the borrowing of about $30 billion, which part of that $30 billion, we're looking at $22.7 billion, which has been requested for infrastructure development. And that's the reason why Babatunde Fashola was one of the ministers who was present at the House of Rep to defend this borrowing, because of course a lot of the money was going to be used for road constructions. Then the state minister of transport as well was also present, which is Senator Gbemisola Saraki. We're also looking at railroads constructions and other infrastructures in the country. Yes, Nigeria does need an infrastructure upgrade. Yes, we do know that we do have an infrastructure deficit. It's been said that we have over 30 trillion naira worth of infrastructure deficit, and we need to spend heavily over the next 20 to 30 years to upgrade our infrastructures. But the issue that we have is, how well have we been able to spend the previous borrowings that we've made over the last 2 or 3 years? This government has borrowed extensively over the last 3 years, and we're still waiting to see the infrastructure put in place, which should drive economic growth.
Yes, well, I'd like to ask, request, is it possible for us to not forget the bad loans that we had before, but leave that to probing, okay? Looking to the future, I'm not saying leave it aside like it's consequential,
Okay.
it's definitely not, it's very important. But looking to the future,
Yes.
how long are we going to keep borrowing
That's
to fund infrastructure?
This is where the issue is. When we're looking at the government, borrowing isn't only the only revenue source. There are different ways of generating revenue. When we're looking at developing infrastructure, it doesn't necessarily have to be government borrowing and government doing all this infrastructure themselves. It could also be a PPP. And this was something that they did in the past, which was one of the Sukuk bond was one of those that they did in the past. And we can use the Lagos State as an example too, where we looked at the infrastructure that was done, the Lekki Koito that was done, which was a public and private initiative.
Yes.
These are initiatives that we need to look into. Government doesn't necessarily have to borrow in order to fix infrastructure. The other way that we should also be looking at as well too is also making sure that we're efficient at government expenditures. This government hasn't really been very fantastic at being efficient at that end.
But if I may answer your question, Val, currently capex is about 2.7 trillion, right?
Yes.
Let's put it in dollar quantity. Our full budget is about $25 billion. Government needs to spend about $60 billion annually for the next 10 years for us to meet our infrastructural deficit. So you want to know how long we need to borrow? We need to borrow well into the next decade or more. So
Which is very sad. Because one of the...
No, it's not sad.
No,
it is
sad.
required to you see, when you travel to South Africa or London or America, you see the advancements.
Yeah.
The idea is not that it has to be done in one day. The logical plan is that as you are borrowing, the infrastructure is being built, people are growing, economy is growing, and repayment is taking place. However, my issue, and this is my last statement, is that is this really infrastructure deficit we're discussing here, or white elephants masking themselves as capex. And white elephants are all those projects that government knows that real money goes into, but at the end of the day, greedy corruption and all forms of criminal hands are there to ensure that they get a piece of the pie.
Well, yesterday we spoke about the transparency portal.
Yes,
that's
we
available
did.
now.
Well, not just us. I mean, it went viral. A number of people were quite excited about that news, with the hope of more transparency in the way that ministries, departments, and agents of government spend their money, particularly in terms of posting or sending reports.
Who's going to be monitoring this?
We can monitor, so it's on the website. If you go to it was developed by the Office of the Accountant General. So if you check out the website, I'll share the link before the end of the show. You see all the details there, especially expenditures that are in excess of 10 million.
It doesn't make a difference. 16 billion was spent on the power industry. Nigerians, go and hold government accounts.
Well, Bengus is quite optimistic about the borrowing and what the money is being used for. He says that very soon the Lagos-Ibadan Railway will be commissioned, which will ease human and cargo movements to and from Lagos. I am confident that this administration will do well with the monies borrowed. And then Goma Chidozie says, please, which infrastructures are we talking about with the amount that has been borrowed already? Right, so two opposing sentiments.
Anyway, the other thing is, are we really sure we're getting value for money when we're talking about these $22 billion that are going to be used for this project?
We're not getting value from it. Let me help
when
you.
It hasn't been used, the money hasn't been approved.
No, look at the past.
The cost of this
jumping
project.
the gun to say it's
Let me give you an
cost of this
example.
project.
About 1 billion was borrowed for the Northeast Infrastructure Development Company. Remember, at the start of this administration, the last tenure, go to the north. Please, I need someone to point out what was built with those billions.
But guess what? Rice has stone. That's why people didn't cook and everybody's left hungry. So I guess we should try to pick it out first to see how. Because no, really, see, if all of us now become very pessimistic and feel like this is not going to work.
No, the problem is that you're not being pessimistic.
Probity.
Can I finish my statement? How are we going to now chart new ways of doing things and hold ourselves accountable and see how we can develop our country? If we rely on pessimism and think that nothing will work.
Tie the completion of those projects to names. That's how you hold people accountable.
Thank you very much. I like that. From Thisday newspaper, I'll have this next story. NNPC proposes measures to curb crude theft and vandalism. And it's a story for you, Devoe. Take us through it, please.
Okay, it's the usual brouhaha with the oil industry, which we all know that they have been the major supplier of our revenue in the past, and they have been aiding in helping us meet our revenue projections. But as you know, they have suffered a lot of setbacks in terms of illegal refining, pipeline vandalization, and crude oil theft. So the new NNPC GMD, who was ably represented by the, the GED upstream, was discussing this at a recent forum, a NETI forum, where he looked at ways that the government would, or NNPC would, install to bring about this complete, to mitigate this situation. And they did acknowledge that there has been a gradual reduction in the vandalization, which is good, that within the past 9 years, they've had about 43,000 pipeline breaks, okay? And that their intent is to improve the security architecture, okay, around the pipelines, and also improve on host community social investments. Now, he said that most people had seen this theft around pipelines and crude oil theft as a social problem versus crime. Why? Given the fact that there was a community to industry expectation mismatch. Okay, this is a bunch of English. Let me break that down. Basically, if you've never been to the Niger Delta, I don't know. There.
Yes, I have.
Are you sure? Because man, I work there. Many people do not know the reality of our Niger Delta. It's a jungle. And the problem is that when you live in the Niger Delta, where they don't have light, they don't have water, they don't have streets, they don't have clinics, they don't have any resemblance of civilization or clean air, you now have these small pipes called Christmas trees, okay? That's where they put up anytime they drill, that pump billions of dollars out of a poor community, and then you come back and you say you're making money. That is the stark reality of the Niger Delta. And this is why some of them today have lost hope in the province of government to develop the Niger Delta and have sought to all these sharp practices like the pipeline vandalization, illegal refining to address their problems. So that's where the NNPC is coming from, and that they would look at ways to ensure that they bridge this gap. I think this problem is actually beyond NNPC, because NNPC is just an operator in the oil and gas industry. It's a government issue. It's an issue of bad governance, of how the yearnings and the aspirations of the Niger Delta people, and in these days, I think there's oil in Lagos as well as the north that they discovered. There has been a constant failure from government to translate these earnings into realizable or tangible investments. Year on year, we discuss budgets. Year on year, we discuss revenues, but they don't see it at the end of the day.
Yes, but we've heard of cases where the federal government actually releases funds to aid this community or support the communities, and the money is sent through their community leaders, through
it develops wings along the way.
The traditional exactly develops wings. Thank you very much, Devoe, for identifying that, and doesn't naturally go down to the masses.
Yes.
So this same clamor and the whole, I wouldn't think in my same mind that vandalism is unconnected with lack of funds that reach, the grassroots, which is why they always agitate every time.
They've sought to self-help.
Where is this money?
They've resorted to self-help.
One of the most depressing things is to go to the Niger Delta area and see the lack of development for oil-rich states. It is depressing. You
Repeat that again. Oil-rich. These states are meant to be like Dubai,
yes,
Saudi Arabia,
because they're the
and
ones
Bahrain.
who get extra allocation, even from the federal coffers. So it's quite sad when you go there and you feel like you've gone back in time, or you've gone to a place that's been deserted and no one is paying attention to them. Yet you see the governors and government officials and some of these leaders, in terms of the creeks, you see them living large and their people are suffering.
Valentine raised an issue of how we're going to move forward. There are some people who this money was given to. Their governors, deputy governors, their commissioners, their names attached to all the monies that have been remitted to the Niger Delta. Who has the muscle and the mind and the executive willingness to hold these people to account? Currently, there's a probe on the NDDC, which is being chaired by the current, what's his name? Akpabio. He's a minister. Remember, Akpabio on his own remit has a court case from his governorship years. You see how we do things in Nigeria. All right, let's move forward. Let's continue.
Thank you very much. Gbolahan from the Punch newspaper. Representatives moved to split the Justice Minister's office from the Attorney General's office. They said the move is to remove political interference of the Attorney General's office or the Attorney General of the Federation.
Yes, this is the House of Representatives looking at to amending the 1999 Constitution, and then they're looking at ways at which they could separate the powers between separating the two offices, which is the Justice Minister and the Attorney General of the Federation. I think it's a good move. I mean, there's been a clamor for this for several years now that we've been talking about it, and then the reason for this is that it's believed that the General of the Federation has too much powers vested in his office, and as such, it will be expedient and important for us to see the separation of these powers. And of course, there's no gain in saying that we know our justice system definitely needs a lot of reform. We can see what is currently happening with Showere at the moment, and the Attorney General hasn't actually made any comment towards this. And the reason for that is because it's believed that the Attorney General of the Federation has a political inclination to always tilt towards decisions of the federal government. So it would stand well to have a Minister of Justice and the Office of the Minister of Justice, and to also have the Attorney General of the Federation. When you have the Minister of Justice, generally what you would expect to see is that you would see the Minister of Justice citing or overlooking the court systems, the prosecution, overseeing, the prosecution, and also enforcement of criminal laws generally, while the Attorney General will most likely be in the defense of generally and also the federal government. So in that way, you're more likely to see better dispensation of justice. The only that I have with this is that I do hope that when the House of Reps do look into this matter, they would actually look into it critically, because of course we do know that sometimes we do have situations where we have overlapping functions.
Yes.
So there has to be clearly defined
Yes.
roles between these two offices in order to ensure that there is proper dispensation of justice.
Thank you very much, Joe. Just
I
eliminate
have
every
a
form of
question.
bias.
Yes, I have a question though. I'm glad that you mentioned the risk we run of having overlapping functions. Do you think that we should have a separation of duties or a clearly defined description in terms of the role and responsibilities of the AGF, so that, you know, what you've mentioned in terms of clear, you know, the duties of overseeing the courts, ensuring that the processes are fair and just, should we actually enforce that rather than having to separate the powers?
Well, I think it's needed to have the separation of that, because at the end of the day, who's going to enforce these powers anyway? Whoever's going to enforce the power has to be the supreme authority, has to be at the helms of
Exactly.
affairs. So you have to separate it eventually.
And two, the main clock says you cannot be the judge and the jury.
Absolutely.
The Attorney General speaks on behalf of the states.
Yep.
So you are judging over matters that you should be sitting on the other side for transparency and equity. If not, what you keep having currently, what's his name? Malamai. How many times has he kept Malami? How many times have you kept quiet when the issues affecting this government, they need to speak on it? For example, the DSS invasion of the courts. Have you heard anything?
Devoe, I hear you. A very valid point. And Ayo's question really points to, you know, there's difference between job, you know, that's distinct from one to the other, and there's separation of powers to know whose ruling supersedes the other. Because I mean, the Attorney General is inclined to the executive, and we should have the Minister of Justice, who really should stand for judiciary and make sure.
I just want to ask you another question. Sorry, we're dwelling on this.
Yes,
so,
please.
who's going to be paying the Minister of Justice? Who is he going to be reporting to? How is he going to be independent and fair if the money?
Payment
of
should
the
be from
person-
source, just as you're doing with the justice system.
So, what's going to be the difference?
Between
So, how would
it
you have?
will still be coming from the government, but of course it will be deducted directly from source. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be determined by the
It's statutory.
Presidency,
And
yeah.
what you're trying to stop is what we've been having. This aim of attorney generals and covering government, where they need to be speaking for government. Cases that need to have gotten expeditious trials, no, they're slowed down and forgotten in history simply because you have a man there who can protect your interests.
I like Twain's question on WhatsApp. She's saying, so what is, he or she's saying, what is the role of the Chief Justice of the Federation? Can't he interfere? So the CJN.
No. The minister, well, most likely people who are within that role would become the Minister of Justice, okay, to ensure that the judiciary is kept in check, while the Attorney General more or less is the lawyer, the barrister for government. But you have joined these positions together, so that's why you have this conflict.
All right. Okay, let's
But the
move on.
Minister of Justice is really has a primary role to oversee all the various
Protection of
departments
people.
and agencies under the judiciary.
judiciary. Absolutely.
The Attorney General, very clear bias, is appointed by the President,
Yeah.
so which makes it very important. To
All right. Thank you very
difficult to
much.
speak against
Let's
the government.
quickly move on. We have a number of stories to get through. Guardian newspaper, Devoe, reps move for council's autonomy, urge action on immigration. So the House of Representatives has passed the second reading of a bill that would grant full autonomy to the third tier of government in the conduct of election for chairman, vice chairman, and councillors. We talked about this a number of times, and it looks like they're making progress in this area. Can you please take us through
Right,
this?
very excellent news, and I hope the third reading comes sooner than later. Now, basically, this bill provides for one, the election and the tenure of the LGA chairman, vice chair, and councillors. Two, it also provides for the positions of the chairman and the vice chair, which are not present at the moment, and also guidelines. Okay, guidelines are the qualifiers for the chairman, the declaration of assets to liabilities, oath of office, nomination of and removal, and all the various tenets that follow. Now, currently, the laws are a bit opaque. Therefore, they have been abused by the state governors, okay, who have habitually been removing, appointing, and appointing local government chairmen without recourse to the law. So when this law is passed into, when this bill is passed into law, or this amendment, state governors cannot remove local government chairman habitually without going through the electoral process,
Brilliant.
which is what you have now.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to it, and hopefully it would, alongside with the NFI bill that grants them financial autonomy. It will strengthen the local government tenure, who is the
Fantastic.
closest form of governance to you.
To the
And I'm
people.
sure many of you don't know your local government chairman.
Do you know who's your local government chairman?
Did you have to put me on the spot? NEPA just took like.
Let's go. I know mine.
No, I visited them. I'm in VI.
Alright,
That's the
like-
Honorable Oniru's daughter.
Don't worry.
Hey, alright, okay, let's move on. Punch newspaper: Nigeria to spend 750.81 billion naira on fuel subsidy in 2020. Punch. I won't go through the details, but I'll allow you to do that, Gbolahan, because of our time. Please take us through this.
Well, there's been an investigation by the Punch newspaper, and then they found out that based on data and information that they got from the Petroleum Product Pricing Regulatory Agency, that Nigeria is going to be spending 750 billion naira as fuel subsidy, and this is contrary to what the Minister of Finance mentioned when she was defending the budget for 2020. She did mention that we were going to be spending 450 billion naira for petroleum subsidy.
Yes.
But according to the calculations that has been done by the Punch, they've worked out the figures that our landing cost for petroleum is 133 naira,
Yes.
and the actual cost for the petroleum is 178 naira. But at the depots, they're selling at 133. So the government is subsidizing about 37 naira per liter of fuel every time we dispense that. And when you do the calculations as well, you look at we're currently consuming about 55 million liters of petroleum every day, and multiply that by 365, that works out to be about 750 billion naira. I mean, we've said it time and time again. It's been said now that this is no longer called subsidy, it's called an under recovery because the cost is being borne by NNPC. But nevertheless, this is still coming at the cost to Nigerians. We've said it time and time again that we need to see a total deregulation of the petroleum industry. It's in nobody's benefit that we continue to subsidize petroleum. We're not funding our education system. We're not funding the healthcare system. We are running a deficit, and we are borrowing extensively.
And funding consumption instead of production.
I'll just have to round off there because, I mean, just to draw us again back yesterday, the Minister of Works and Housing had suggested that subsidy be removed and that be rechanneled into fixing of roads, building infrastructure
I agree.
in the country. Let's move on to our next story very quickly. Lagos to enact law criminalising keeping dangerous animals as pets. God has this story following the disclosure of the lion who was kept as a pet in Victoria Island. Lagos State Assembly is making moves, or Lagos State government is to enact a law criminalizing keeping dangerous animals. Really, very quickly.
Yes, it came out in the press. A 2-year-old baby lion was kept by a foreign individual who lived in Lagos in Murokola. And when it was discovered, I think the Lagos authorities came to euthanize. Was it euthanized? No, it was injected, sterilized. It was tranquilized. Thank you, and then taken away. So now they are backing it up with laws that such animals are threats to society, and that once they have this law, it would be put to speedy execution. Well, what can we say? I think whilst they're passing this law, Lagos should also look at the creation of a zoo, so that, because baby lions are very cute. It's just that they shouldn't be kept in homes. They should be kept in zoos. When last did you visit the zoo? Grew up with zoos, but children of today don't know what zoo is.
We have zoos in Lagos.
Some people have likened Nigeria to a zoo. I don't know. It's just an opinion. But
we have zoos.
The other question is that what
we have
exactly
conservation centers.
What are they
we
going
have
to
a
do?
conservation center.
There are no animals
but
there.
there's no lion there. I've been there before.
There are
You
no
don't find
animals.
that
There are no.
It's just a conservation center.
Why do you want to have a lion at the Lekki conservation center?
We're talking about lions now at the
a
moment.
zoo.
Now, so we're talking about a zoo, not a conservation center.
Yeah, but
the
a zoo-
question I wanted to ask is that what exactly is the state going to be doing with this now? Because I'm sure it would have been well kept with this gentleman. I mean, well fed. Yes, they're moving it to the zoo. But have you been to zoos in Nigeria? Have you seen how, skinny, I should say, the animals are in the zoo?
One second.
Yes.
People are now asking an essential question. How did this lion come in?
That's the point
Who
now.
brought that lion in?
How did
Is this the only lion in Lagos?
Oh no, of course not.
Also,
Most
because the
likely not.
foreigner, it's fine because the neighbors do not.
So that's why they're passing the law, so that all those who have
The
fallen
bill
short.
is called the Dangerous Animals Bill.
Make sure the
Yes.
animals are well looked after, though. That's very important.
Please, Prince here says there's a lion at Omu Resort Zoo. You should go check it out. Saeed says Mr. Easy has
They
one
need
lion.
food.
Runtown
Abi?
has another lion. Somebody also so cerebral has another lion. A lot of people
We
got
need
it.
lions, we
people do
need
have-
elephants, we need
Oh,
what
a
do you
number
call
of
them?
people have talked about the results where there's a lion.
It's of
So what
crocodiles.
we're asking for is, and I think that's a private
Oh
result.
no, there's.
What we're asking for is a Lagos-funded zoo. I think I mean, for educational purposes, of students
For
who go on,
population,
yeah, well, we go
for tourism.
Devoe. We know of students who go on excursions to see animals that they probably wouldn't see except at the zoo. So it's very important that we call for this. It's also a tourist attraction. We're talking about looking for ways to diversify, the
revenue base.
Revenue base. So it's important for us to look into this as well.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Devoe Okorie is at Devoe Okorie on Twitter. Gbolahan is at Mr. GQuest on Twitter. Special thanks to you and thank you for sending me a message on WhatsApp. We'll do this again. We do it every day, actually. It's 7:30. It's called Freshly Pressed 91. Let's continue the conversation on social media. And next, we talk sports inside of the locker room. Stay with us here on Smooth 98.1.
I was waiting for someone to say
Are we recording for the
lion
entire
of body
30
law.
minutes now?
No. Somebody finally said there's another lion. It's called the Dagger Band. That's what somebody said. I was like, there's a lion in body, but I can't say it to my mouth.
Oh my God, goodness me!
Somebody
I'm gonna
said
be a
there's
celebrity
another
very
lion
soon, man.
that should be tranquilized.
They went there.
They did though. I was waiting. I was like, I can't know, but like in my mind, I wanted to say, but I knew that